session. Thank you for joining us in this remote meeting format we're using in response to Governor Brown's stay home, stay safe order. This format enables the City Council to meet and take care of business while keeping its members, staff, and the public safe. For work sessions like this one, where there is no opportunity for public comment, those wishing to access the meeting can do so by watching the live stream available on our website, the broadcast on Comcast Channel 21, or by calling into one of the phone numbers listed for this meeting on the public webcast and meeting materials web page. And as always, avenues of communication with me and city councilors are available, including email and voicemail. And thank you all very much for joining us. We have just one item on the agenda today, but before we do that, I just wanted to alert you to a schedule change. You all received an email from Brooke yesterday, I believe. We are moving the discussion and action on star voting to later in the month, July 27th. And the only reason for that move is because the July 13th, this coming Monday schedule was so packed with agenda items that we thought it would be better to give a little more elbow room and time for discussion on the star voting. It still falls well within our time constraints. If you decide to refer something to the November ballot, there's still time to do that. So we're not foreclosing any options, but giving you just a little more time to discuss. So just wanting to reaffirm that there is that schedule change. And with that, we are ready to talk about the Climate Action Plan 2.0. So I turn it over to Manager. Are you kicking this off?
Yeah, I'll just say a couple of things. I'm really excited for Chelsea's presentation today to walk through the kind of new revised CAP draft. As you know, when I first started in this role, we were coming out with our first draft and had some feedback that people wanted more work. And I've just been really impressed with the work that Chelsea and team have done to bring the group back together. And thank you, Mayor, for also bringing back together your ad hoc committee, because I think the work has been really well done. So with that, I'll just turn it over to Chelsea.
Thanks, Sarah, and thanks everyone for having me back here today. Just for folks watching at home, my name is Chelsea Clinton. I'm the Sustainability Manager with the City of Eugene, and I'll jump right into my presentation, hopefully with a more successful screen share today. Here we go. All right, how does that look? All right. All right, so today I'm here to walk through the revised Community Climate Action Plan 2.0, or the CAP 2.0, and answer your questions. My team and I look forward to hearing feedback from you and the community throughout the month at work sessions and at public forums. And our goal is to work towards approval of the CAP 2.0 at our July 29th work session. First, a quick recap of the project timeline. As you know, we've been working on the CAP 2.0 for quite some time. You, City Council, updated the Climate Recovery Ordinance, or the CRO, in 2016, which was one of the main drivers behind updating our plan. You can see the detailed timeline of the project on your screen, where we worked through a 2.5-year process, working with many stakeholders to create this plan. Today, I will focus on the work since the first release of the CAP 2.0 in November 2019. As we did community outreach, as Sarah shared a minute ago, for that first draft of the plan, we heard a strong call to take more time and to review and revise the document. So beginning in February of 2020, we reconvened the Mayor's CRO ad hoc work group. The work group met 4 times over the past few months and helped guide revisions to the plan. We learned a lot through the process, and I think we now have a much stronger plan to guide our community into implementation of the CRO goals. So before moving any further, I'd like to pause and just say thank you to all the folks who helped with the CAP 2.0 over the past few years. On the screen, you can see we held focus groups, we met with students, we convened the Mayor's ad hoc work group, the equity panel, the Eugene Climate Collaborative Partners, and we talked to community members at many events. We also met with you, City Council, 14 times on this topic since 2017. And I also want to thank my executive team and my internal climate action team that advised on the project. And to anyone else that I missed, thank you. It's been a long a long walk, but I think the planning process has been a really big success. Today, we'll walk through the revised document. It's a much longer document than the first version, so I recommend navigating it by breaking it up into sections. Section 1 includes most of the data in the plan, including the pathway to the CRO goals. Section 2 shows our community's commitment to action. It includes both mitigation and resiliency actions, as well as a new chapter dedicated to consumption emissions and actions. And then Chapter 3 details how the full CAP 2.0 process built our community capacity to address climate change and summarizes what community engagement will look like moving forward. And now diving into the document more particularly. So today we'll mostly focus on the new elements that we've added or changed since the first release of the CAP 2.0. And as you can see on the slide, that's quite a bit. So we added more detail to the plan. There are more actions, and the actions that are in there are much longer and more detailed. And we also added a chapter on consumption-based emissions. We added additional topics, focus sections on housing, transportation, and urban forestry, and we added a chapter on actions that individuals can take to impact climate change. We added more data and graphs to show the pathway to the CRO. We added 72 ideas for potential actions from community members. We added a community engagement strategy that includes an accountability and reporting mechanism. We added a timeline, and we updated our TBL analysis of all the City of Eugene actions, which was reviewed by a subgroup of the Mayor CRO ad hoc work group. So with that, we'll jump into the document. The first couple of chapters include an introduction and an overview of the CAP 2.0 process, which I effectively just went over. So we'll skip over those today, and we'll head right into section 1. So section 1 is our data-driven roadmap to climate change, to climate action, and it starts on page 19 of the document. This section includes 2 chapters. Chapter 3 covers our local impacts to climate change. That chapter is based on a white paper produced by our technical consultant, Good Company, and is largely unchanged compared to the first version of the CAP. And then chapter 4 is called The Pathway to the CRO, and it contains quite a few new figures and data points. So we'll walk through some of those now. You can find the climate recovery thermometer, or figure 1, on page 24 of the document. It includes a lot of information, so I'll walk through it pretty slowly. On the left, you can see that we include data from 2010 through 2050. We include data from 2010 to 2015 to provide some historical context. And then 2017 is our baseline year for our CRO goals and the first year of data collection after the CRO community-wide greenhouse gas emissions goal was passed in 2016. While the CRO calls for reductions through the year 2100, the goal is to achieve about 90% of those reductions by 2050. So we stopped this graphic at the year 2050 for now. On the right, you can see the greenhouse gas emissions targets. These targets align with the CRO goal of a 7.6% annual greenhouse gas emissions reduction. So the baseline number of 1,010,000 metric tons carbon equivalent, the baseline number is 1,010,000 metric tons of carbon equivalent. And then in 2050, the goal is to emit 70,000 metric tons of carbon equivalent or less. The width of the thermometer gets smaller or skinnier as you move up to reflect the shrinking greenhouse gas emissions targets over time. And then the horizontal red line shows our current emissions level, and our last data point is 2017. So this is kind of by definition, we're on track because this is where we're starting from. And we'll update this as our inventories come in. Next, I'll jump to figure 4, which is on page 27. Figure 4 shows some historical data, again, showing Eugene's emissions between 2010 and 2017. And then in the dashed orange line, it shows Eugene's business as usual forecast, or BAU forecast. This trend line shows that emissions will increase to 1,115,000 metric tons if Eugene does nothing and continues on its current trajectory, taking into account a 1% population growth over those years. And then last, this graph shows the green line showing the CRO goal. And the goal is to reduce emissions to 360,000 metric tons annually by 2030. That's a 790,000 metric ton reduction annually, comparing the business as usual forecast in 2030 to that CRO goal. On page 28 of the document, you'll see a familiar graphic. We continue to use the buckets throughout this document to help simplify what our community needs to do to achieve the CRO goals. They look a little bit different in this version. So first, we changed the names to add more clarity. So we have transportation emissions, which includes emissions from gasoline and diesel fuel, and that makes up 53% of our local emissions. We have building energy, which includes emissions from electricity and natural gas and makes up about 32% of our emissions. And then last, fugitive emissions, which includes emissions from waste and refrigerant loss, and it makes up about 15% of Eugene's emissions, our local emissions. The buckets now only represent local emissions or emissions emitted within Eugene's geographic boundary. In the last draft, they represented local emissions and imported emissions. This is always a little bit of a confusing topic. So again, I'll slow down here and I'll use my favorite example of a cell phone. If you think about a cell phone, there are emissions emitted when we mine the minerals that go into making the metal and then in the manufacturing process. And all of those emissions are emitted typically outside of Eugene. And there's emissions emitted when that product is shipped to our community. None of that is included when we talk about our local emissions. That's all what I would refer to as imported emissions. And so when we combine the two, that's what we call our consumption-based emissions. And it's pretty uncommon in the United States for any community to really think about those consumption-based emissions because it's really hard to even get at our local emissions. But Eugene has pretty much always throughout the history of our sustainability program had our eye on that and really tried to think about that in our work. So going back to the bucket slide, we didn't lose that information from our consumption-based emissions, but it's not represented in the buckets any longer. Instead, we added an entire chapter that focuses on those consumption-based emissions. We made that change to add clarity. In both drafts, our goal of a 790,000 metric ton annual reduction only reflects local emissions. And so we hope that this change makes it easier for folks to follow. So throughout the document, it's local emissions unless you're in that consumption-based chapter. And then next, I'll walk through the pathway to the CRO, which begins really in a focused way on page 29. And I worked really collaboratively with the Mayor's CRO ad hoc work group on these graphs and want to appreciate them for all their vision and thoughts that went into these graphs in particular, which I think turned out really well. So this graph is figure 5 and it's on page 29 of the document. And if you ignore the colors for a moment, in total, it shows Eugene's business as usual forecast, that same dashed orange line from a previous slide that I showed. And that forecast estimates that Eugene's emissions will grow to 1,150,000 metric tons annually by 2030. Then this graph divides that business as usual forecast up between the buckets. And we make an assumption here that the proportions that we see in 2017 are the same proportions that we see in 2030. That was beyond the scope of the analysis of our project, but we just use that for illustrative purposes because it is one scenario that could happen. And then this is really the base for the next few graphs that I'll show you. So this graph and table are figure 8 and 9 in the document, and they show the building energy buckets measured contributions included in the document. And I pulled these out as examples, but there are parallel figures for the transportation and fugitive emissions buckets that you can find right next to it in the document. So the graph on top is the same overall graph from the figure from the previous slide. And here we highlight all the building energy emissions in green. The top solid black line in the green rectangle shows our business as usual forecast if we were just looking at our building energy emissions. The dashed line shows the CAP 2.0 forecasted emissions reductions. So in this case, we anticipate 75,000 metric ton reductions in our building and energy bucket. Those emissions are, where those emissions reductions come from are all detailed in the table below, and they correspond to actions that come later in the document. And then the dotted line shows the CRO goal if we were to apply that goal proportionally across each bucket. So it shows a 64% reduction, which is what we would need to hit by 2030 to be in alignment with the CRO. The table includes the high impact practices that our consultant Good Company identified as the most likely to have a significant greenhouse gas emissions reduction impact in our community. There are many other actions included in this plan, and some may have more significant impact than we anticipated. But for the purposes of measurement for this plan, this table reflects our best thinking about what we can expect will lead to significant reduction of emissions in our community. And then last, this is the last graph I'll go over in this section. So this graph is our full pathway to the CRO picture. This is figure 12 and is on page 34 of the document. The top three wedges of this graph show the measured contributions from each of the three buckets, transportation, building energy, and fugitive emissions. And in total, those add up to 485,000 metric tons annual reduction by 2030. The graph also includes this gray wedge, which are the remaining emissions reductions needed to reach our CRO goal by 2030. And to fill in that wedge, we look to three strategies: the Northwest Natural Franchise and Climate Agreement, state and federal action, and then carbon offsets. We aren't able to measure the impact of these items at this time, but we are committed to moving all of them forward. So the first two are a core part of the city's work plan. And then the third, carbon offsets, we will look to as necessary to help reach our goals as a bridge strategy. We also continue to do research and look for new ideas. The climate and sustainability fields, as you know, are evolving very rapidly, and we expect new strategies to emerge over the next 10 years. Next, I'll move to section 2, and this is our commitment to action section. It includes 3 chapters. One around reducing local emissions, which includes most of our mitigation actions, and then the consumption emissions chapter, which I referenced earlier, and climate resiliency. So first in this section, I'll talk about the guiding plans and policies. A guiding principle of the CAP 2.0 overall from the start has been to build on existing efforts and add momentum to those efforts. The plans shown on this screen are the plans that guide our transportation, our building energy, and our fugitive emissions and resiliency work throughout our community. So weaving our climate work together with these plans will make our community more successful in achieving our CRO goals. If you look in the document, each of these sections leads with reference to these plans in a short description, and then also includes different actions that are linked back to these plans. This section also includes all of our actions, as I said, and we significantly increased the number of actions in the plan. So the first plan had a combined 88 actions and recommendations from the equity panel. So this expansion was really based on feedback that we heard from the community and from the mayor's CRO ad hoc work group, which asked for more actions. And then you'll also notice that within the actions, there contains a lot more detail as well as timeline information where that was available. So to summarize, there are 115 actions from the City of Eugene and the Eugene Climate Collaborative Partners, or the ECC actions. You may recall that we asked the ECC partners to only include actions that they were really committed to moving forward over the next 5 to 10 years. So I think these actions reflect a strong community commitment to this work. We also added 25 state and federal actions that reflect the city's priorities when we're lobbying, and also reflect measures that our state and federal partners are taking that will have an impact at the local level. And then we included the 41 equity recommendations from the equity panel. Chapter 6 is a chapter solely dedicated to Eugene's consumption emissions. And as I spoke about before, this includes Eugene's local and imported emissions. The chapter includes a significant amount of education material, including these charts. So these charts show how consumption-based emissions relate to those sector-based or local emissions. And that figure on the left, figure 13, is on page 66 of the document. And then another example is figure 16, which is on page 69. This is probably one of my favorite graphs in the whole document, and it shows which types of products create the most emissions and at which what point during the product's life those emissions are emitted. It's pretty interesting. And then much of the content created in this chapter is thanks to a grant that we got from the Oregon Department of Environmental Quality. And last, for this section, you'll notice 3 different focus sections, one on housing, transportation, and urban forestry. These provide educational material that help draw that connection between these content areas and our climate work. And we chose these 3 areas based on feedback from community members and the Mayor's CRO ad hoc work group. The last section, section 3, starts on page 81 and shows how we built our community capacity to address climate change through the planning process. So this section includes 5 chapters. Chapter 8 summarizes the equity panel work and includes some of their recommendations on community engagement. And the remainder of their recommendations are in earlier chapters throughout the document. Chapter 9 summarizes the Eugene Climate Collaborative work. And then chapter 10 summarizes the work of the Mayor's ad hoc work group. I wanted to draw your attention to chapter 10 in particular, as it includes the 7 U2 community ideas for potential actions. And as I mentioned in our last work session, that list was developed based on input from the Mayor's CRO ad hoc work group and summarizes more than 300 ideas from community members for potential future actions. Chapter 11 is new and includes ideas for individuals to take action on climate change. And this chapter was also added based on feedback from the Mayor's CRO ad hoc work group. It includes ideas like calculating your carbon footprint, taking active transportation, so walking, rolling, biking, or taking the bus, telecommuting, using LED light bulbs, making a meal plan to reduce food waste, repairing and reusing items, shopping secondhand, and creating a supply kit to prepare for emergencies. Chapter 12 summarizes the city's community engagement plan moving forward. And this also was discussed by the Mayor's CRO ad hoc work group. And we talked about it in detail at our last work session. So today I'll just read through the list as a refresher. So we plan to reconvene the equity panel, to continue to support the Sustainability Commission and look to other citizen advisory bodies as it makes sense. We'll roll out our individual household and neighborhood action communications campaign. We'll continue to convene and work with the Eugene Climate Collaborative. We'll develop a sustainable business engagement strategy. And then our reporting and accountability components include an annual report that both looks back and looks at what we've done in the past year and looks forward to what we'll be working on in the year to come. It includes a dashboard that the Sustainability Commission is going to help us develop. And then it also includes updates to our greenhouse gas emissions inventories every 2 years. And then we also updated our appendices. There are quite a few in the document, I think 12 in total. And I'll just draw your attention to a few items here. We updated the TBL analysis for all City of Eugene actions. And we did that in partnership with a subgroup of the Mayor's ad hoc work group. And then we added a timeline for City of Eugene and Eugene Climate Collaborative actions. And we also put in lots of materials from the Mayor's CRO ad hoc work groups, the meeting materials, and all the information from the community survey that came in, so folks can really see all the granularity there. As I mentioned at the start of the presentation, our goal is to work towards approval of the plan at the July 29th work session. So between now and then, there are 2 public forums, and I would encourage those who have feedback to get in touch with City Council and provide comment at those forums. And then we are also scheduled for another work session next week, as well as the one on the 29th. Looking ahead, beyond approval of the plan, I wanted to take a moment to remind folks that we are already working hard to achieve the CRO goals. This slide summarizes some of the efforts happening at the city already, and it doesn't even start to reflect on all the efforts I know are going on with our community partners as well. There's a lot happening at the city in each department. So a few examples, our Public Works Department is leading the implementation of our transportation system plan and our EV strategy. Our Planning and Development Department is responsible for Envision Eugene and houses our waste prevention program, who does a lot of great work around consumption based emissions as well as that waste stream. Central Services is implementing the Natural Hazards Mitigation Plan, and our Intergovernmental Relations Program does a lot of work at the state and federal level to move this work forward, as well as our Facilities Department, who's working across the organization to update our facilities. Library, Recreation, and Cultural Services helps with fix-it fairs and hosts bike safety classes, and the Fire and Police Departments are looking at their fleets and their facilities to find ways to reduce their emissions. And then last, here's a summary of the sustainability program moving forward. So our program is really going to be focused in on the community engagement components that came out of this work and getting all of those up and running. And then we're also focused in on moving forward those additional strategies that City Council considered in 2019 over a series of work sessions. So for example, supporting the Northwest Natural Franchise Agreement work, the Home Energy Score and commercial benchmarking programs. We're looking into how to get those up and running. Energy efficiency programs, supporting the electric vehicle strategy implementation, and so on. And we're also supporting other internal climate action efforts in alignment with the operational CRO goals. So we continue to convene our internal climate teams. We work with our fleet, facilities, and fire departments, which have internal climate action plans specific to their service area. And we work with other folks across the organization as well. And then this year, we're also looking to purchase offsets to meet that CRO operational greenhouse gas reduction goal. So with that, I'll turn it back over to you, Mayor.
Great, thank you so much, Chelsea. Really great report, very detailed. It's actually, I think it's well written and well constructed, and that was a great presentation. And while I'm waiting for people to raise their hands, I'm just going to just sort of reiterate that this was a pretty robust and very constructive and positive process. This second round of the Mayor's Ad Hoc Committee, it was a strong group of community members many of whom had a lot of expertise, many of whom had commitment but not as much expertise, and they came together initially fairly skeptically about whether they would really see progress, whether they would have their answers met, and by the end were really, I think, feeling that they had been. The document reflects pretty thoroughly the concerns that community members had about the original draft of the CAP 2.0. So it feels to me much stronger. We said in the very beginning of the document that the community could get behind, right? That it would really create a framework and a roadmap for us, and that the community would get behind it. And I feel as if this really gets us so much closer there, making it really clear what the city is doing, what our partners are doing, what the community can do, and how we hold ourselves accountable. So I really want to thank you for pulling that work together, and then open the floor first to Alan and then to Emily, both of whom also sat on that committee. So Alan.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor. As the author of the CRO, I'm really happy to see this this thing move forward and get near completion. It's been an overnight success over the last 2 years. So I'm really excited to finally see this put into a final form. I wanted to thank especially Chelsea. She's done an amazing amount of work and really good work to pull this all together. And the team, of course, that work on this, it's not just one person, it's a whole bunch of people, including Good Company, who are a consultant, but also the ad hoc committee added a lot to this. And it's just an enormous amount of work, lots and lots and lots of public input into this. And it serves as yet another good model of how to communicate with the community. And I thought the ad hoc work group was very successful. I mean, like the mayor said, people walked in skeptical, and at the end they said we felt heard. And I think they really did add to the plan, and their contributions of greenhouse gas reduction ideas are integrated into this. This is a living document. It's not something that's we just, okay, we're done with the plan. This thing will go on and on and on. A good thing, as I said before, Chelsea's young, she gets to do this rest of her life. on the consumption-based goal, a lot of people think we should adopt that. But remember, the consumption-based goal, if you use the cell phone analogy, building the cell phone, those are somebody else's emissions that they need to deal with directly, because that's where they come from. But we need to understand where they all are. But this is a very data-driven plan. It has commitments and it has funding, and it's very commitment-driven. So it has funding, measurements, and specific ideas to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And I think that's a really important part of this. I really love the way that it's laid out. Lots of info, but it doesn't look really dense. It has lots of graphs and charts to help people along the idea, along with the with the text. Really good input. I think that people realized how much more difficult it is to actually create actionable plan items in the plan than just say simply do this. You have to get the funding, the implementation, and all the commitment to get these all things done, and that will happen over time. So we'll be working on this for a very, very long time. I love the way that the community ideas were added. Maybe you can tell us how they are included and how they impacted the plan, Chelsea.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. So the community ideas for potential action, we had a really robust conversation about them at the ad hoc work group. We actually set out to have the work group vet them and rank them, prioritize them. We got a lot of information from Good Company about those actions. And ultimately the work group said, we don't have capacity to do that in such a short amount of time. So we ended up putting them in a list in chapter 10, and we'll reference those as we move forward and have more resources and capacity to think about more ideas after we get through the commitments that we've already made in the CAP. But it's lots of great information. Yeah,
we've got a decade of work to do just on those. And same with the equity panel recommendations. How are they integrated and how did they change it?
Yeah, the equity panel recommendations are included within the different buckets as they make sense. And then in particular, the equity panel had a lot of recommendations around resiliency, which is great. So it's included in those sections. And then they had community engagement recommendations, which I know folks across the city in different program areas are taking to heart, which is great. And those are included in chapter 8. But we included those as recommendations in this version of the plan, being really specific about the wording there. We don't have the same resources behind those at this time, but we'll be bringing those back to you over time as we think about how to incorporate those and weave those into our work.
Right. And there's also a timeline and a prioritization of the actions items.
Yeah, so we went back to all of our partners, internal and external, and said, what are your timelines? What can we include in here? And so we include a timeline. It's pretty long, so we put it in the appendix. And you'll notice that some items have a timeline, and then some items are ongoing programs. So there's a nice delineation there, so you can see where each thing falls.
Yeah, 18 months of work into 400 pages.
Okay, thank you. Emily.
Thank you. Thanks to everybody who worked on this, but my admiration and appreciation for Chelsea is almost without boundary. I think this is a great document. It's certainly been a long time in the works, and it will, as Alan says, continue to be in the works, especially as new technologies and ways to reduce our carbon are invented. I was on the second part of the ad hoc committee and didn't really know what to expect. Talked to a few people first and kind of felt like, yeah, we're going to come in and figure out all the missing parts. And we did get to do a little of that, but a lot of it was talking to each other and talking about the document. And I'm amazed really at how much it has changed. Not in that the original information has changed, but the addition of quite a bit more details and And the pictures don't take up, 2 pages. It's much more a sustainable document. I think the graphic design is great. It gives you a lot of places to connect in. So the ad hoc committee had a lot of people participating who weren't on the committee. And I think that was really great to have the room, the first meetings, so filled with people listening, because this does take all of us. So I'm glad, Mayor, that you reconvened that. I think it was worth people's time and effort. I'm also really glad we had the equity panel. I think, as we all know, we need to pay a lot more attention to that aspect of things. So having that in there now, I think is really, really important. And they bring ideas of actions that weren't included in other parts. It's really long, and I wonder how many people will really read all of it. It's great that we have it. It's a wonderful reference work, and I hope a lot of people will read it. But I also hope that we make a more condensed version, because there are a lot of repetitions, the same facts over and over. And I think we could put that in a smaller document that might be more accessible, and then a brochure, because not everybody wants to read things. And the plans to get this out to the community as a whole, I think, are really, really important, because it is going to take all of us. And the ad hoc committee and the people working on it are a great start. I'm really looking forward to working with the entire city and our outside partners on getting these goals to actually occur. Thank you.
Thank you. Chris?
Thanks. Not having been on the committee, I kind of approach this a little bit as what an outsider would say as they look at this work that's being done, and thinking about that in terms of, well, what is the ultimate outcome that we can hope to achieve, and how close are we, to achieving that? And my original thinking was really focused on the tangible outcomes, which are, would we reduce our carbon emissions? Would we be able to get to a certain emission level? Would we be able to achieve a certain level of carbon neutrality? And that's a very desirable goal. And I think those tangible outcomes are something we want to work towards. Another part of me says, well, if Eugene were to reach those tangible outcomes, would that have a significant impact on global warming or global climate change? And to some degree, probably not a huge impact. So I have to thank the mayor for reminding me there is more than just the tangible outcomes for this process. There's actually a whole set of intangible outcomes that are equally, if perhaps not more important. And that is, can a community like Eugene make significant effort to try to change its climate position, its climate work, in a way that embodies collaboration, which is what we're trying to do, which embodies realistic and achievable kinds of strategies, things that we can do, that a community can do, and can do it in a way that can be successful, relatively so. Can we demonstrate to the rest of the country or to others that may watch that, yeah, a community can take this on. A community can try to implement strategies. So as my thinking has evolved, it's become as important to demonstrate that we can keep this wagon rolling, that we can keep trying to achieve some level of carbon reduction, realistically do it in a way that the community can stay on board as we do it, to show other communities this is possible to do. And and I don't want to try to back off our goals, but I want to say, to me, achieving a tangible, specific limit is important, but it's equally important for me that we demonstrate to others that this can be done, that it can go beyond just talking about it and passing an ordinance and making a resolution and speaking about it and saying, no, there's actual things we can do. And those things we can show the rest of the world or the rest of the country that they can be done in a way that a community can stay on board with, can work with, and can systematically work to achieve. And so I think in terms of outcomes, yeah, I want to see us achieve tangible outcomes in terms of greenhouse gas reduction. But I think it's perhaps as important that we demonstrate that a community like Eugene can do these kinds of things and stay together while we do it. And I think that intangible benefit is a very important one.
Thank you. While I'm waiting for anyone else to raise their hand, I'm just going to follow on that, Chris. I've been having, as many of you have, many conversations the last couple of weeks around racial justice questions, and one of the things that comes up is that what we have done in this climate action plan, the way we have proceeded to develop it, the equity panel, the sort of process of incorporating community input into the final document is actually a good model for other work that we need to do as a city. And so we have tested those models out. I mean, I think the equity panel is one in particular that's very valuable that we will carry forward in other work. And I think our recognition in this work that there's a huge equity component in the impacts of climate change and in how we address it. And so it's a powerful model on a lot of levels. So I really just want to put that out there and congratulate all of you for the work that you do on this. And with that, I turn it over to Claire.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Chelsea. I agree with my colleagues in terms of the impressive amount and quality of work that you and the folks who helped you in preparing this document have put into it. I think the results are very impressive. And kind of reiterating some of what Alan and Chris and the mayor already said, I really see this as serving as a roadmap for us and our partners to use as we work to implement policies and programs to meet our stated goals. And as Alan noted, this is not a static document. We should expect updates to it over time as we get updated data, as we adopt the policies and implement the programs that are outlined there and act on some of the recommendations that we've heard from community. And I think it's really valuable to have this vision, the goals and the data that we're using to inform our climate recovery efforts all gathered in a single place for the community and for ourselves. So we're not always having to scramble back through past meeting, notes and presentations, or where does that document live? It's really capturing pretty much everything one would need to understand what we said we would do, the ways we might do it, and then eventually what we have done. So I think it's great. I'm looking forward to hearing what other members of the public have to say about the document. But thank you to everyone who had a role in informing it and helping shape it and put it together.
Thank you. Any other councilors with comments or questions about this document? If not, we're having a short meeting. So there's no other business and no other questions. I think you can get yourselves off early to lunch. Thank you all very much. Chelsea, really excellent work. Thank you so much, and great presentation. And we look forward to hearing the public comments. And have a good afternoon, everyone.
Thank you.